If they asked me, I could write a book about the way she walked and whispered and looked. I could write a preface on how they met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot is just to tell you that I loved her a lot. And the world discovers as my book ends how I made my mother my friend. When my mama was telling stories, time stood still. It didn't matter if I was learning a new monologue for acting class, writing a term paper, or listening to Ethel Merman sing Some People from Gypsy for the 9,000th time on the hi-fi. When I heard that whiskey tenor voice come wafting out of the living room, I ran down the stairs of our old colonial manor house on Comstock Hill Road, and I entered the living room quietly, and I took my place. I knew all of her stories by heart by the time I was 12 years old. She could have been talking about doing a film with Marilyn Monroe, having lunch at the White House, rehearsals for her latest Broadway play. She could have been talking about what she bought at Gristedes Market last week. Didn't matter. All of her stories were fabulous. Then again, maybe it wasn't the stories as much as it was the storyteller. She'd be sitting in this room, in this very chair, in front of a blonde marble cocktail table. Now, on the table at all times, there were two prominent features. The first was a pewter apple, about the size of a softball. You flipped it over, and it was a cigarette lighter. The other prominent feature was a large Victorian cake plate that was overflowing with ashes and lipstick-smeared cigarette butts. She had a true blue filter tip in this hand, a watery glass of Dewar's Scotch in this one. And she'd be wearing something like a cobalt blue blouse with a pair of blue jeans, and in this ear, she had one enormous pounded silver hoop earring. Looked like it belonged in a window curtain rather than a human ear. And she'd say something like, "You like this blouse? You don't think it's too loud, do you? I don't want to look like a goddamn jelly bean." You see this earring? Hell, how could you miss it? I wore this to Luke's PTA meeting last week. His homeroom teacher came up to me. Some little powder pigeon of a woman in sensible shoes. She said, "Oh, my, you've lost your other earring." I just looked at her and said, "Honey, it takes a lot of class to just wear one." Now that was my mama. Up in Connecticut, she was Mrs. Jack Yankee. But on Broadway and in Hollywood, she was a character actress by the name of Eileen Heckert. She was a wonderful actress. And because she was such a wonderful actress, she was an amazing storyteller. She passed away about 4.5 years ago, and boy, there's so many things that I miss. But one of the things I miss the most are the stories. Now, after she died, as my two older brothers and I were going through her house and sorting through all of this memorabilia from a 50-year career in show business, for instance, my older brother Mark would suddenly say, "Hey Luke, what's this picture?" I love that picture. That's from that time Mom was hanging out on the set with Clark Gable. When was Mom ever on a set with Clark Gable? Oh, you know, that great story Mom used to tell about when she was filming The Bad Seed, and the director found out she'd always had such a crush on Gable, so he invited him to come by the set, and she sat there drooling the entire time? No, I don't remember that story. Well, of course you do. You must have heard it 50 times. Not me. I suddenly realized I was the only one who knew all of these stories. I was the keeper of the flame. Now, right around this time, I was out in Palm Springs doing a staged reading of a play that I had co-written, and one of the people involved in the reading was a glamorous European actress, a lady who had worked with my mother back in the days of live television by the name of Maria Riva. And Maria said to me, "Darling, I think your mother was marvelous. She was beef jerky on the outside and Jell-O pudding on the inside." And I said, "Well, thanks, Maria, but you know, I think your mother was pretty marvelous too. Of course, she was Jell-O pudding on the outside and beef jerky on the inside." "Darling, of course. That's why they got on so well." Now, believe me, she knew what she was talking about, because her mother was Marlene Dietrich. Oh. Talk about a diva. So as Maria and I started exchanging war stories about her mother and about my mother and the friendship they had over the years, my writing partner suddenly said, "You know, Luke, you should put together a program and call it Diva Dish." Well, the light bulb went on in my head, and I spent the next 6 months going through newspaper articles, video archives, and unpublished photographs to put together some of what you're about to see today. Because the only thing I love more than knowing these stories is being able to share them with people. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with Eileen Heckert and her work, let me give you a little background. She was one of the hardest working character actresses of the past 50 years. She won an Academy Award, a Tony, a Golden Globe, 2 Emmys, 4 honorary doctorates, and she was inducted into the Theater Hall of Fame. And she worked with some of the biggest divas of the last half-century. Now, to give you a sense of the scope of her body of work, I put together a little 7-minute video retrospective. I realize it's impossible to distill a 50-year career into 7 minutes, but this will give you a sense of some of the highlights. Perhaps for others of you it will be a refresher. So let's look at this little 7-minute clip, and then we'll get right into the dish.
Anything new.
What's that you say? Nothing new? Ah, lady, that's just not so.
Did you say that?
I certainly did. 'Cause Jell-O tapioca puddings, they're new. They're brand new.
Well, hey. Hey, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
How old are you?
21, and you?
None of your business.
I don't see how learning to smoke is going to make any difference, Fan.
Like I told you, Alma, a whole new personality can turn the trick. Jack's used to you because you got no surprises left in you. Now, what's he going to say the first time you fish out a cigarette and light up?
He's going to say, "Alma, have you gone crazy?"
Yeah, well, when he does, you just take a drag on a cigarette, blow the smoke in his face, and say, "What's it to you, lover?"
Oh.
All right, now, come on. I got to be serious here. Now, watch me. Watch my wrist. That is real gone to hell smoking.
He looks like the safest.
Oh, I never know what to say to him.
It's easy. Just say some cute little joke. Like, hello, mister, buy me a drink. I'm so dry, I'm spitting cotton. That's a real cute one.
What I came to see you about. I asked Miss Fern what happened to Claude's medal, and she wouldn't tell me a thing.
I don't know, Mrs.
You know
Daigle,
more than
truly.
you're telling. You're a sly one because of the school. You don't want the school to get a bad name. But you know more than you're telling, Miss Butter Wouldn't Melt Fern. There's something funny about the whole thing. I said so over and over to Mr. Daigle. He married quite late, you know, in his 40s. Of course, I wasn't exactly what the fella calls a spring chicken either. We won't have any more children. No more.
Come on, Mama.
Your costumes, baby, all your best parts. Little Eva and Fanchon the cricket and Mother's helper.
Oh, Mama, throw them away. I'm 20 years old. Well, I am.
Lorna, come on, let's go.
No.
Oh, come on, baby.
Leave me here. Leave me to the Indians. What does it matter? I'm dead already. My child just killed me.
Oh, baby.
After all I've done for that girl.
Yes.
After all I've done for you. Snoochie, you know I gave up my career
Yes,
for
I know,
her.
baby.
And she's only 16.
Yes.
16, that's all she is. Everybody knows that. I was a baby myself when I
I
had
know,
her.
baby.
You know that.
Hold on to the saddle, baby.
Yeah, wait for me.
Morris, for God's sake, will you hurry up? Morris, the eggs are cooking. What's the matter? You got a pimple?
Cut myself shaving.
A man your age has got no business having pimples. Eat your eggs.
Hey, is there any toast, Mom?
You got latkes.
Well, that's a little heavy for breakfast, don't you think?
So take a good look at yourself. A skeleton without a closet.
Well, it's stupid for us to compete. Here's what I think we ought to do. Why don't we put both our names on the final version, whoever wins?
Oh, Mr. Brett.
Oh, baloney. How gullible do you think I am, sweetheart? You heard something, and I have a pretty good idea what you heard.
Listen.
You lost, didn't you? And you were not man enough to admit it. And now you want to crawl into the winner's circle? No dice, Grant. No dice.
Well, that's just the... Oh, Aunt Lou!
Mary, you should be a writer. You have a way with words.
The separation between you and Aaron is absurd. How are you going to work things out if you're not together?
Well, we're practically together, Mother. We're both seeing the same therapist. Come on.
What?
Come on. Roach, come on, go. Her name is Dr. Leslie Rosen. We're working on my self-esteem. Roach, honey, please, you've got to go.
You are married. You have a daughter. You're very happy. You don't need self-esteem.
Mother, Dr. Rosen says that... Well, she says you're very controlling, Mom.
Me controlling? Oh, that is ridiculous.
Mother,
Roach, go.
I like apples to be nice and shiny.
This reminds me of something. What is it?
I have no idea.
You handing me the apple. Nice and shiny. I know. Snow White. Remember when the witch brought her the poisoned apple? I'm sorry. I didn't mean that the way it sounded. I know you're not a witch.
Of course not. And I know you're not Snow White.
The ladies nominated for the best performance by an actress in a supporting role are Jeannie Berlin in The Heartbreak Kid,
Eileen Heckert in Butterflies Are Free,
Geraldine Page in Pete and Tilly,
Susan Terrell in Fat City,
Shelley Winters in The Poseidon Adventure. And the winner is...
The winner is Eileen Heckert in Butterflies Are Free.
I would like to thank the very first man who ever recommended me for this part, Howard Otway, and a darling crew, and of course you. Thank you.
Now, let me dive right in by giving you a little dish on the Academy Awards. When Robert Duvall laughed that way over Shelley Winters, the appearance was that his laughter was saying, isn't it funny that Shelley Winters was nominated for the Poseidon Adventure? Well, in fact, everyone expected Shelley Winters to win for the Poseidon Adventure. And for Jimmy the Greek, who was the biggest odds maker in Las Vegas at the time, My mother was his only upset of the entire evening. Now, at the time of the nominations, my mother had this wonderful Hollywood agent by the name of Ina Bernstein. And when the nominations came out, Ina called my mother and she said, "Eileen, my darling, have you seen Shelley Winter's performance in The Poseidon Adventure? Do you know what you're up against?" "Well, no, Ina. To tell you the truth, I don't." "Oh, honey, 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 honey. Get yourself a big bag of popcorn and go." Towards the end of the picture, she does an underwater ballet in her bloomers for 20 minutes, during which time she saves Gene Hackman's life. She then surfaces, belches ever so slightly, grabs her left tit and dies. Now, my darling, how can you possibly compete with that? All you do is act in your picture. Regardless of Ina Bernstein's good opinion, everyone did think Shelley Winters was going to win. But getting back to Robert Duvall, when he came out on stage, he locked eyes with James Caan, who was his drinking buddy from The Godfather, which they had shot the year before. They had many private jokes together on the set. So as Robert Duvall was announcing the nominees, James Caan made some obscene gesture. Well, Robert Duvall saw this and totally lost it on live television. Needless to say, Miss Winters was not pleased. Now, the very handsome white-haired gentleman who grabbed my mother and kissed her when she won was my father, Jack Yankee. They were married for 53 years. Boy, he was an incredible man. I never realized just how incredible until I lost him about 9 years ago. So when they called my mother's name, he was so excited that he grabbed her and kissed her with such force that as she went up to the stage, he looked down and saw that he had skin under his thumbnail. He thought, "Dear God, what have I done?" Now, if you look closely at some of these publicity shots with Cloris Leachman, if we zoom in on this one, see that little spot on my mother's chin? If her chin were up like this, you'd see this long trail of blood going down her neck, where my father gouged her as he gave her a congratulatory kiss. She was very fond of saying, "Honey, I was the first bloody Academy Award winner." So they went to the governor's ball, and every star in Hollywood was there. And at one point, my father said, "Oh, honey, I know this is your night, but there's only one person here I want to meet, and she's coming down the stairs right now." And there, coming down the stairs, being practically carried by two beefy boys, was none other than Mae West. She was held together with 4 pairs of eyelashes. Later on, Mom said to me, "Honey, at this point in her life, she looked like she was good for about an hour a day, and this was her hour." "Oh, Miss Hackett, how'd you do? Congratulations on your award." Then she looked my father up and down and said, "But it looks to me like you already had the prize." My father nearly peed himself. Someone else she spoke to that night was Rosalind Russell, who had received the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award. My mother had tremendous respect for Rosalind Russell as an actress, but she'd always been a little jealous of her, because the role that put my mother on the map on stage was in William Inge's Picnic. And this role was recreated in the film by Rosalind Russell. Nonetheless, she wanted to congratulate her, and Roz was very ill. This was shortly before she died. Her face was all bloated from cortisone injections due to her crippling arthritis. So Mom went up to her and she said, "Roz, congratulations, it's Hecky." And Rosalind Russell took my mother's face in her hands and said, "Oh, if I'd let you play your Picnic, you'd have had your Oscar 20 years ago." So when they got back to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, there was a huge stack of messages and telegrams. This was in the days when people still sent telegrams. And the one on the top simply said, "Call Marlena. Regardless of the hour, call Marlena," with a phone number in Paris. Mom turned to my father and she said, "Jack, won't this be thrilling? My very first phone call 2 hours after winning the Oscar will be from Marlene Dietrich. Hello. Hello, Marlene. It's Eileen. Darling, your makeup looked terrible. It did? But, darling, it did in the movie, too. And Marlene Dietrich spent the next 10 minutes berating my mother for her lack of style, her lack of fashion, her terrible hairdo. My mother sat there saying, yes, ma'am, all right, yes, all right, I won't do that. Yes, ma'am, yes, oh, okay, all right, Marlene. In Marlene Dietrich's ABC, under Heckert Eileen, it says, if she were acting in Europe, she'd be queen of the boards. In America, the typecasting barbarism deprives the world of her true talents. My mother was so excited when this was first published, she went out and bought about 75 copies to give all of her nearest and dearest as Christmas gifts that year. But how did these two ladies know each other in the first place? Well, as I mentioned, Maria Riva, Marlene's daughter, did a lot of work in live television. My mother did a lot of work in live television. So they got to be friendly, and Maria had several soirees where Marlene would be holding court. And after one such party, Marlene turned to her daughter and said, why do you spend time with that strange woman? She's very talented, but she's strange. And what that meant in the parlance of Marlene Dietrich is that she didn't understand Eileen Heckert, because she didn't understand how someone could be as talented as she thought my mother was without being glamorous. And Maria said to her mother, I am very fond of Eileen Heckert, and I am not giving her up as a friend. So Marlene figured if you can't beat him, join him, and she went about befriending my mother. She went to see her on Broadway in The Dark at the Top of the Stairs and invited her to supper afterwards. And Mom said, Miss Dietrich, I'm honored. I'd love to go to supper with you, but I have a husband and 2 small children up in Connecticut. And if I don't catch the 11:07, there's not another train until the milk train. So a few months later, as the play was ending its run, Marlene came to the theater again. She said, my darling, now that your play is about to close, I am going to be doing my nightclub act in Las Vegas. You will come and spend the weekend with me. Now, this wasn't a request. This was a command. So Mom made the necessary arrangements and showed up at the Sands Hotel. And the concierge came up to her and said, oh, yes, Miss Heckert, welcome. We've been expecting you. Miss Dietrich is down in the theater. So Mom went down to the theater and opened the stage door very quietly, not wanting to interrupt Marlene's rehearsal. She didn't hear anything. She stepped further into the theater. Still nothing. Finally, when her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, she saw a scrub woman on the stage, on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor. Mom said, excuse me, I'm trying to find Miss Dietrich. Hello, darling. How was your trip? Marlene, what are you doing? Surely they have people here to scrub the stage. Oh, these stupid people, they never get this floor clean enough for me. I'm going to drag a $50,000 ermine around this stage tonight, and it's got to be spotless. Apparently, Marlene Dietrich did this in every theater she went into. Here's a shot of that cute little house coat she was referring to. So after Marlene had finished her charwoman duties, they went back up to the suite, and Marlene said, now, my darling, of course, tonight you will come and see my show. But for tomorrow night, I can get you tickets to anything on the Vegas Strip. What would you like to see? And without missing a beat, Mom said, oh, Marlene, do you think you could get me in to see Sinatra? Now, how could my mother have known that at that time in Las Vegas, Frank Sinatra was the only performer who outsold Marlene Dietrich? So, Mom saw Marlene's show that night and made a big fuss backstage afterwards. And while the champagne was flowing, Marlene turned to my mother and said, now, my darling, I have arranged your ticket for tomorrow night for Frank Sinatra. You must meet my publicist at the box office at 4 o'clock sharp. So, at 3:45, Mom went over to the box office, And the publicist came out looking absolutely ashen, and he said, "Oh, Miss Heckert, I am so sorry. I told Miss Dietrich I could only hold that ticket until 2. So Mom had wised up by now, and she went back to Dietrich's suite, and Marlena said, "My darling, what happened?" And Mom said, "You know, Marlena, I thought it over, and I really don't want to see Frank Sinatra. I'd rather see your show again tonight." And Marlena opened her arms for an embrace from her loyal subject. Of all the stars my mother worked with over the years, there was probably none bigger than Marilyn Monroe. And in those clips you saw from Bus Stop, Mom played Marilyn's best friend in the film. They had many scenes together. Mom had 2 sets of stories she would tell about Marilyn Monroe. The first set of stories went something like this. "Marilyn? Huh, what do you want to know about her for? She wasn't an actress, she was a personality. Always coming to the set late, not knowing her lines. She could be a real pain in the ass if you want to know the truth." The second set of stories went something like this. "Marilyn. What a sad, lonely, vulnerable lady. She never really believed that she was loved. Was constantly seeking approval. Desperate to have a child. Don't make me go on. To the day my mother died, she could never tell that set of stories about Marilyn Monroe without bursting into tears. And that's the side of Marilyn I want to focus on today. The softer, gentler Marilyn, if you will. They had many scenes together on location at the rodeo. I love this picture of the 2 of them in between takes, clutching their big glasses of ice water. And while they were shooting in the stands that day, Marilyn really started letting her hair down to my mother and talking about the many foster families she was bounced around to as a child. And at one point, Marilyn turned to my mother with tears in her eyes and said, "There was this one foster family, and I really think they wanted to keep me. But they were already in their 60s and felt they were too old to have a small child. But when they sent me back to that orphanage, they gave me a little straw hat with a matching straw suitcase. That was the finest gift I was ever given in my entire life. I really think that old couple might have loved me." Marilyn also adored children. And my 2 older brothers, Mark and Philip, spent a lot of time hanging out on the set. Oh, she was crazy about those boys. And one of the things that Marilyn would do after a long day of shooting, she would take these oranges and grapefruits out of these gift baskets she was constantly being sent, and she would go out onto the balcony and call down to my brothers in the suite below. "Mark, Philip, you want to play a game? You want to play catch?" And Marilyn Monroe would play catch with my brothers on the balcony below, using citrus fruit as their only sports equipment. But at ages 2 and 4, they weren't very good catchers. So Mom would be in the other room on the phone with my father, and she'd say, "Oh, for God's sake, Marilyn's out there on the balcony playing catch with the boys again. And guess who's going to have her raggedy ass down at the pool at 2 a.m. picking up all those bloody grapefruits and oranges?" I love this picture of Marilyn with my 2 brothers. It's become something of a family heirloom. And my brother Philip is the one in Marilyn's arms there. And if we just zoom in on him for a moment, see the way he's resting his elbow? All I'll say is that is one happy baby. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about the mom. The yin and the yang, the diva, the mom. Well, she was also a terrific mom. And she was the type of mom who would think nothing about doing a matinee and an evening performance on Broadway and then filling Easter baskets until 4 o'clock in the morning. She gave us elaborate birthdays and Christmases. She loved any excuse for a party. And up in Connecticut, she would say, "Oh, honey, please. Nobody knows who I am up here. I'm just plain Mrs. Yankee." Now, I ask you folks, how many Connecticut housewives do you know who go to the supermarket in a full-length mink coat, dark glasses, with a cigarette holder, and a copy of Variety tucked under her arm? Plain Mrs. Yankee? I don't think so. But that was part of the fun. You never quite knew if you were going to get the diva or the mom or when they were going to intertwine. One time, I remember I was in high school and she had to write a sick note to my math teacher. So she had just found out about one of her Emmy nominations for one of those episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And as she's writing this sick note to my math teacher, she's basking in the glow of her Emmy nomination. And she writes, "Dear Mr. Levi, please excuse Luke from math class yesterday. He had the stomach flu. Thanks for watching. Eileen Heckert." My math teacher loved it. I think he even framed it. Another time, my parents were having a yard sale. Neighbors came from far and wide to see if Eileen Heckert's yard sale crap was better than anyone else's. It wasn't. Now, Mom was stationed at the foot of the driveway with a cigar box full of dollar bills and quarters, 24 donut holes, a pitcher of Nestea, and 2 packs of True Blues. Now, that was enough to keep her going all day long. Towards the end of the day, this lumpy, no-necked man came lumbering down the driveway with this folded oriental screen under his arm. "Hey, yeah, you're Eileen Heckert, aren't you? Yeah, I saw you on that show once. Yeah, listen, about this oriental screen, you got it marked $5. I'll give you $1.50 for it. What do you say?" Well, it's the end of the day. We are trying to get rid of stuff. All right, what the hell? $1.50. "Hey, yeah, and will you autograph it for me, too?" "Not for $1.50. One of the things that she would do at the holidays is just after Thanksgiving, she would take the train into Manhattan and she would go around to all of the various department stores and find out which Santa Claus had the best routine that year so she knew where to take me. So this particular year, she decided it was Macy's. So we waited in line and I had this picture taken with Santa. And just after this picture was taken, Santa, who was an unemployed actor, turned to her and said, "Hecky, my God, how are you? It's been years." She thought, I am going to kill this son of a bitch who has just ruined Christmas for my child. He's going to be scarred for life. But I took it another way. I knew that only Mommy's really close friends in show business called her Hecky. And if Santa knew Mommy well enough to call her Hecky, I was getting everything on my list then. So she took me to Sardi's for lunch, the famous theatrical restaurant, and Vincent Sardi took her caricature off the wall and showed it to me up close. Then he served me my ginger ale in a champagne bucket. I just felt so grown up. Then while we were having lunch, all of a sudden, Soupy Sales blew a kiss to my mother from across the restaurant. Now, Soupy Sales' kids show was the hottest thing on the air, and I thought Soupy Sales was it. "Mommy, do you know Soupy Sales?" "Well, darling, as a matter of fact, I do. Would you like to meet?" "Would I like to meet him?" So she beckoned Soupy over to the table and he paid his respects. And after he left, I said, "Now, Mommy, you tell me the truth. Did my older brothers ever meet anybody as important as Soupy Sales?" And she's thinking Debbie Reynolds, Marilyn Monroe, Paul Newman, and she looked me right in the eye and said, "No, my darling. They never met anybody that important." Santa Claus and Soupy Sales in the same day? I could have died happy at age 7. Sometimes a day goes by, one whole entire day, when I don't think of her. 24 hours pass, I look around and find that I haven't thought of her, not even when I'm somewhere we used to go, not even It's hardly every day, it's most unusual, in fact. I can't remember when, but sometimes the day goes by when I don't think of her till morning comes, and then there she is again. As I mentioned, she loved Christmas. And there was a point in time where you knew you had really arrived on Broadway if you were invited to Eileen Peckard's tree trimming party up in Connecticut. This was a grand affair. Now, some of the people who came to help decorate the house over the years included Christopher Plummer, Doris Roberts, Blythe Danner, Joanne Woodward. One year, Paul Newman gave me some pointers on how to upstage my co-star in children's theater. I loved him for that. Mom was always trying to outdo what she had done the year before. And this particular year, she decided she wanted an elaborate pastry, something she had seen years ago at Marlene Dietrich's house called a croquembouche. Now, this is a tower made up of profiteroles, little tiny puff pastries, that are held together with spun sugar. You pull them off one at a time and eat them. Very difficult to make. She called caterers all over Fairfield County till she could find someone who had even heard of the damn thing, let alone was willing to make one. And finally, she spoke to this one woman who said, yes, I know what that is. And if your party is next Sunday, well, I suppose I could have it for you by Wednesday. So, on Wednesday morning, hello, this is Mrs. Yankee. Who? I'm calling about the croquembouche. Oh, it's not ready today. Call again tomorrow. So, the next day, hello, it's Mrs. Yankee calling about the well, I couldn't possibly have it for you today. I had a dinner for 200 at the UN last night. Call again tomorrow. Well, this went on and on, till finally, the day of the party, my mother was a nervous wreck that she wasn't going to have any dessert for her guests. So I drove with her over to this caterer's home. And as we walk into the kitchen, this woman is standing there with a pastry tube, applying rosettes to a cake. Yes, it's ready. It's on the kitchen counter. You can leave the check in the wicker basket by the door. Carry it carefully. So we get into the car, and I'm holding the croquembouche for dear life, thinking, if I break this, I will be grounded for the next 20 years. So as we get into the car, my mother immediately lights a cigarette, and she said, oh, that caterer was such a bitch. I will never do business with her again. Yeah, she did seem pretty snooty. What was her name, anyway? Martha Stewart! And as many of you know, before Martha Stewart became Martha Stewart, she was a caterer up in Connecticut. Many's the time. As a kid, I'd go to weddings and bar mitzvahs, and Martha was there dancing around with the canapes and terrorizing the kitchen help. So the year of the croquembouche, Mom had this terrific Broadway agent named Milton Goldman. And Milton called my mother about a month before the Christmas party, and he said, Hecky, with your permission, I'd like to bring a special guest to your party. And that guest was none other than Ethel Merman. I was over the moon, because I had just seen my first Broadway musical, which was Hello, Dolly, starring Miss Merman, and it was all I could talk about. Now, I have to tell you folks, at age 10, this kind of news doesn't go down too big on the playground. Who's coming to your parents' party? Ethel Mertz? Well, her name is really Vivian Vance, and yeah, she's going to be there too, but this is Ethel Merman. She's a big musical comedy star. She's doing Hello, well, they didn't care and they didn't want to care. But around the house, it was all I could talk about. Till finally, my mother pulled me aside and she said, now listen, you mustn't gush over Miss Merman. Big stars don't like that. You may tell her how much you enjoyed her performance in Hello, Dolly once, but leave it at that. So the night before the party, I was so excited I could hardly sleep. And that morning I was so nervous I could barely button the buttons in my little Christmas vest. And as Miss Merman arrived, I went up to her and I said, "How do you do, Miss Merman? It's really a pleasure to meet you. I really enjoyed your performance in Hello, Dolly, and my mother would like to know if I could fix you a drink." And in that booming voice you could hear in the second balcony of any Broadway theater, she said, "Sure, kid, I'll have a martini." Well, Miss Merman, I'm only 10 years old, and I'm afraid I don't know how to make a martini. "Come on, kid, I'll show you." And God bless her, in a true Auntie May moment in my life, Ethel Merman led me over to the bar and showed me exactly how to make her variety of martini, which was stirred and not shaken. And here I am at age 10, I can barely see over the bar, and I'm holding this big half-gallon of Tanqueray gin, and my palms are sweating so much, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to drop this on Ethel Merman's foot, and she's going to be out of Hello, Dolly for the rest of the run, and it's going to be all my fault. Well, mercifully, that didn't happen. Hey, that's pretty good, kid. Tell you what, Luke, you can be my personal bartender all night long. So for the rest of the party, whenever anyone would say, "Hey, Merm, can I freshen your drink?" she'd say, "No, thank you. Luke's taking care of you." So as the party wore on, I went up to my mother and I wanted to ask her a question about my new best friend, Ethel Merman. Mom, do you think it would be okay if I asked Miss Merman if she'd like to come up to my room and see my puppet collection? I was very into puppets and marionettes at the time. Boy, between the puppets, the marionettes, and the love of musical theater, if they didn't suspect something by then, they were never. But Mom was great in her response. She said, "Now, my darling, you may ask her, but you have to understand that Miss Merman is a very important lady. And there are a lot of people here who want to talk to her. And you mustn't get your feelings hurt if she says no." So I understood the ground rules. I waited for an appropriate moment. I think Miss Merman was just leaving the loo. And I went up to her and I said, "Excuse me, Miss Merman, if it's not too much trouble, do you think you could come up to my room and see my puppet collection?" Well, maybe. "Oh, it's all right. You don't have to. I know you're a very important lady and a lot of people here want to talk to you. It's okay." And I went away with my tail between my legs, but I got over it pretty quickly, the way kids do. Well, about 20 minutes later, Milton Goldman came in and he said, "Hey, Merm, come on, get your coat. Limo's almost here." And she, "Wait a minute, Milton. I gotta go upstairs and see Luke's puppets." So she came upstairs, and I just gave her the nickel tour instead of the dollar tour. I only showed her the top 5 instead of all 55. And a week later, she sent me a lovely Christmas card with a note saying, "Dear Luke, thank you for taking such good care of me at your parents' party. Merry Christmas and love, Ethel Merman. She will forever have a tender place in my heart, and I still know how to make a fabulous martini." Now, someone who does not have such a tender place in my heart is Betty Davis. My parents were at a dinner party with Miss Davis the night of the Ted Kennedy Chappaquiddick speech. Now, as some of you may recall, this was a big political scandal where Ted Kennedy drove off a bridge in the town of Chappaquiddick on Martha's Vineyard. The young intern who was with him was drowned. There was a lot of speculation as to what their relationship really was. Terribly tragic incident. So they all watched the Chappaquiddick speech, and then they reconvened in the living room. And Betty Davis, who had never met my mother before, turned to her and said, "So, what are you going to say in your telegram, Heckert?" I beg your pardon, Miss Davis?" "Well, we were all so moved by Teddy Kennedy's speech that we're all sending him telegrams of support and congratulations. What are you going to say in yours?" Well, Miss Davis, to tell you the truth, I had a few qualms with the senator's speech, and I don't think I care to send a telegram at this time." "So, just what kind kind of a hate monger are you, anyway? And Betty Davis lit into my mother with this torrent of abuse. Believe me, it took a lot to reduce my mother to tears, but Betty Davis did it in a matter of seconds. So at the end of this barrage, Betty Davis turned to my mother. She was very into astrology at the time. And she turned to my mother and said, "What sign were you born under?" "Aries, the same as you." "Well, then all I can say is you must have been born on the shitty end of the cusp." At that point, my father barged into the room and he said, "I don't give a damn who you are, lady. Nobody talks to my wife that way." And the whole thing got very heated until Betty Davis turned to the hostess and said, "Thank you," and was up and out the door before dinner was ever even served. Now, while we're on the subject of politics, let me tell you about the diva at the White House. Lady Bird Johnson was a big theater lover, and she saw my mother on Broadway in a play called You Know I Can't Hear You When the Water's Running. And a few weeks later, my parents received an invitation to a formal luncheon at the White House. Well, they were thrilled. Mom shopped and shopped for the customary white gloves and the perfect afternoon dress. So as she was going through the receiving line, "Hello, hello," as she got to LBJ, she said, "Well, Lady Bird came to my matinee 2 weeks ago. Where were you?" "How do you do, Miss Heckert? It certainly is a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." "Well, Mr. President, where were you?" "Well, ma'am, we were having a little problem with the Russians that day. I had to be at a summit meeting. I sure am sorry I missed it." Uh-huh. So for the rest of the afternoon, LBJ kept eyeing my mother. Finally, as they were about to leave, he ran up to her and he said, "Miss Heckert, ma'am, I think I can make the evening performance on the 27th, a month from tomorrow. Would that be all right with you, ma'am?" "Thank you, Mr. President. That'd be just fine." God forbid he should lose a vote. George Cukor was a legendary Hollywood director. He directed Camille with Greta Garbo, The Women, The Philadelphia Story, My Fair Lady. He directed so many of the Tracy Hepburn comedies. And remember that scene of my mother on horseback? Well, he also directed that, a not very good Western called Heller in Pink Tights. Now, this movie starred Anthony Quinn and Margaret O'Brien, and the lead in the film was Sophia Loren. And now, for all of her natural beauty, Sophia still felt she had to enhance it. And one of her many beauty secrets is that she had these invisible tapes she had flown in from Sweden, and she would put these tapes on the corners of her eyes and they would pull just a little bit to enhance the almond shape. Well, during the shooting, Mom and Margaret O'Brien and Sophia got very chummy. And Margaret O'Brien was just fascinated with all of Sophia's beauty secrets. So one day, my mother had a late call, and as she came to the set, George Cukor was ranting and raving. "George, what is the matter? You know all that great location work we did last Tuesday? Well, we have to reshoot the whole goddamn morning because Margaret O'Brien looks Chinese." And sure enough, she'd gotten a hold of Sophia's tapes and pulled them too tight. Now, unfortunately, they weren't able to do any of those reshoots. So if you ever see this movie on The Late Show, look closely at Margaret O'Brien. For about 3/4 of the film, she looks like Margaret O'Brien. For the last quarter, she looks a little like Madame Chiang Kai-shek. Butterflies Are Free was one of my mother's signature roles. She did it for a year on Broadway. She did the film for which she won the Academy Award. She took it to London. She even took it on tour to Columbus, Ohio, so her mother could see it. It was also my first Broadway opening. I love this picture of my father and brothers and me outside the stage door. Look at that shirt on me. They couldn't even find a collar to fit me. I was so little. It was also the play where I first learned what acting was all about, because I saw the play from so many times from out front. And after a while, I would hang out in my mother's dressing room with her dresser. So one night after the final scene, my mother came off stage with tears in her eyes. "Hi, Mommy." "Hello, darling." "Mommy, what's the matter? You seem so sad." "Well, I am. My child has just told me he doesn't need me anymore." "Mommy, did you have a fight with Mark?" "No, darling. My child in the play." And that's how I first learned what acting was. Years later, I played the role of Don Baker, the son in Butterflies Are Free, in a community theater production. And from that time onward, it became a secret dream of mine to play the final scene of Butterflies Are Free with my mother. Well, once we were supposed to do it for a benefit up in Connecticut, and at the last minute, my mother got bronchitis and had to back out. I was devastated. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, through the magic of technology, I am going to play the final scene from Butterflies Are Free for you with my mother. Now, let me give you a little background. 1 month ago, Don Baker, who's been blind since birth, moved away from his overprotective mother. Now, she's the author of a series of children's books called Little Donnie Dark. He started having an affair with Jill, the kooky girl who lives next door, and he's fallen desperately in love. His mother showed up unexpectedly this morning to pack him up and take him home. The three of them have been battling it out all day long. It's later that night, and Jill has just announced that she's moving in with another man. Left on his own, the blind son now has to confront his mother. Mom? Mom, are you there?
Yes.
I have something to tell you. You'd better sit down.
Is it something awful?
No. You'll like it. But you'd better sit down.
I'm sitting.
I want to go home. Will you get the car and I'll pack? Did you hear me?
Yes.
Well, then why don't you say something?
I intend to. I'm collecting my thoughts.
Okay, you do that while you get the car? I won't take long.
Just a minute. I think we should talk about it.
Talk about it? Isn't that why you came down here today? To take me home? Well, then what is there to talk about? My God, we've been talking about it all day long. And you said yourself this place isn't Buckingham Palace.
And you said it's the Taj Mahal.
Are you saying you don't want me to come home?
No. I'm simply saying I think we should talk about it. Now put the bag down.
I'm coming home, Mother.
Down. Please don't misunderstand me. This place is dreadful. I doubt that I will ever like it, but I didn't choose to live here. You did. You couldn't wait to get a place of your own. You rushed into this, now you want to rush out. I think we should talk about it.
Isn't it amazing that you and I think exactly alike, but never at the same time? I can't make it, Mom. I just know I'm not going to be able to make it.
Why? Because a girl has walked out?
2 girls. Let's don't forget Linda.
And it could be 10 girls. Girls walk out on sighted men, too, you know.
Is that supposed to make me feel better?
Well, it's supposed to make you stop feeling sorry for yourself. You have never felt sorry for yourself before. Please don't start now. Oh, Donnie, you are going to meet so many girls. And one day you'll meet one who's capable of a permanent relationship. Jill isn't. She knows this herself. I really think that you're better off staying here for right now. I don't want you coming home discouraged and defeated. You got your music.
Christ, Mom, will you get it through your head once and for all? I am not little Donnie Dark. You're goddamn right I'm discouraged. I am defeated. It's over.
You remember the first Donnie Dark story?
No.
You were 5 years old. We were spending the summer at Lake Tahoe. Dad took you out into the lake, and it was the first time that you'd ever been in any water that was deeper than your bathtub. You were terrified. They could hear you screaming all over California. Dad brought you in. I put you to bed. You trembled for hours. That night I told you a story about a little blind boy who could swim the 7 seas, who could talk to dolphins.
And the dolphins told him about the enemy submarines that were coming to destroy the United States Navy, and little Donnie Dark swam ashore just in time to save them. What a lot of crap.
The next day, you learned to swim. Listen, I didn't write those stories hoping for a Pulitzer Prize in literature. I wrote them because I found a way of helping you. Whenever you were discouraged or defeated, I told you another story. You tried a little harder, and you did a little better. Do you want to make up a story now? Or are you man enough to handle the situation yourself?
A month ago, you didn't think I was man enough. You said I wasn't ready to leave home. Why have you changed?
I don't know that I've changed. You're not the boy who left home a month ago. I came down here today hoping that you were. You know, darling, it's not easy to adjust to not being needed anymore. I can do it now, and you get on with your own life. I'd like to see you have some decent furniture, some dishes and some glasses. I'll send some up.
Okay.
And linens. Bigger ashtrays. You know, if you fix this place up, it might not be so bad. Could I help you fix it up a little?
Sure.
I'll call you in the morning and we'll talk about it.
Mom, I'm glad you came.
I love you, darling.
I know, Mom. I know you do. My mother did a honeymooners reunion with Jackie Gleason and Art Carney and all of the usual suspects. She was playing Jackie Gleason's mother-in-law, even though he was 11 years older. They were doing a live taping down in Atlantic City, and my father and I drove down to watch it over my Thanksgiving break from Juilliard. Now, after 3 months of studying Ibsen and Chekhov and Shakespeare, I was very full of myself. In the car ride down, I said to my father, "Well, Father, perhaps when I'm finished at Juilliard, I'll go for my master's degree." He just bit his tongue and didn't say anything. So we watched the live taping that night, and needless to say, the honeymooner style of acting was just a little different from what I was learning at Juilliard. I was appalled. We went to supper afterwards, and I said, "Good God, Mother, how could you do such a piece of shit?" And she just glared at me over her shrimp cocktail, and she said, "I know it's shit, and I know exactly what I'm doing. I am paying your tuition." My mother did Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park on Broadway. She had turned down the role of the mother originally because she was hesitant about working with this unknown director by the name of Mike Nichols. I wonder whatever happened to him. And during the run of Barefoot in the Park, a fan who owned a sporting goods store came backstage one night, and knowing that she had 3 boys, he gave her 3 sets of metal baseball cleats in varying sizes. Well, she thought this was kind of a peculiar gift, but thanked him nonetheless. So a few weeks later, I was sitting at home, watching TV, minding my own business, when my brother Philip came in. "You have to move. I want to watch F Troop." "No, I was here first, and I'm watching Bugs Bunny. It's the one with the purple monster." Well, he saw one of those metal baseball cleats lying around, and he picked it up and he whacked me in the back of the head with it. My mother was in the kitchen doing dishes and saw the whole thing. Now, for you parents, you know those times that you see your child do something so rotten, you just want to strangle them? Well, I was screaming bloody murder. So once Mom came into the room and made sure that I was okay, she started chasing Philip all around the room. But he was so little and squirrely that she couldn't catch him. Finally, she got him pinned behind the living room sofa, and she started kicking in his direction. Now, she knew she wasn't kicking him, but she was so angry, she was just kicking in his direction. And she said, "Just wait till your father gets home, young man. You're going to be grounded for a month, and no TV." Well, once the heat of the moment had subsided, she said to herself, Well, that was pretty crummy behavior. Being a good Catholic girl, I guess I better get my butt to confession. Now, all of the Catholics on Broadway knew that if you went to St. Malachy's on 49th Street, the little old priest there loved theater people, and he'd give you absolution and get you in and out in 10 minutes. So, after a matinee performance of Barefoot in the Park, she ate a quick dinner in her dressing room, put her hair up in curlers for the evening show, wrapped a shocking pink scarf around her curlered head, slipped on a white mink coat, and in full stage makeup, she trotted off to confession. While she was sitting there saying her rosary and waiting to go into the confessional, she saw the old priest that she knew and liked come out of the confessional, and she saw this young 20-something Irish priest go in. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 3 weeks since my last confession. Father, I kicked my child. And this young priest glared at her through the grate in the confessional. And he took a good, long look at her. You kicked your child. Yes, Father, I kicked my child. Are you a working girl? Well, yes, Father, I work. What part of town do you work in? Well, mostly around Times Square. And what hours do you work? Well, primarily in the evenings. Oh, and who takes care of your children while you're working evenings? Well, my husband does. Oh, and your husband approves of your work now, does he? Well, not really, but I love it so much he knows he can't stop me. And you kicked your child. Father, is this going to go on much longer? I've got to get back to work. What exactly is it that you do? Well, I'm an actress, Father. What did you think? Well, what show are you in? Barefoot in the Park, Father. Good God, you're going to be late for the evening show. Say one Hail Mary and get the hell out of here. My mother did an episode of Ellen DeGeneres' original sitcom, playing Ellen's salty-tongued grandmother. Imagine that. And this was just before the famous Coming Out episode was going to air, where Ellen announced herself as a lesbian on national television. Well, as I'm sure many of you remember, this was a big deal in the entertainment industry. First time anything like that had happened. And there was a moment in their scene together where Ellen said to my mother, "Grammy, you have such a way about you. What's the word I'm looking for? You're such a..." And Mom did one of her famous deadpan takes and said, "Bitch?" Well, in this one taping before a live studio audience, Ellen said, "Grammy, you have such a way about you. What's the word I'm looking for? You're such a..." Mom tripped over her tongue and said, "Butch?" The director fell off his chair laughing. Ellen turned beet red. And Mom started backpedaling like crazy, saying, "Honey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. It just slipped out. Honest, Ellen, it was a mistake." When I told this story to the Broadway actress Joanna Gleason, she said, "Luke, when something just slipped out of your mother's mouth, it's as if she took it to Boston for out-of-town tryouts." Now, coming up, I want you all to have your programs handy, because in the back of your programs, there is a list of divas. And in a few minutes, you're going to have a chance to ask specifically about any of those divas that you want to know about. But before we get to that, I want to share with you what happens when a diva departs. When I was a little boy, my mother used to share a story with me about Rex Harrison when he was doing My Fair Lady on Broadway. At the time, Rex was married to a gorgeous British film star, an actress by the name of Kay Kendall. She was the love of his life. And one of their nightly rituals is that Kay Kendall would come to the theater and watch the last few minutes of his performance as Henry Higgins, standing in the wings, and then they would walk home together. Well, during the run of My Fair Lady, they learned that Kay Kendall had leukemia, and it was terminal, and she didn't have long to live. I remember my mother saying to me, "Honey, can you imagine how Rex must have felt? Standing there on stage, seeing his sweetheart in the wings, as he'd be out there singing, 'I've grown accustomed to her face. She nearly makes the day begin. I've grown accustomed to the tune. She whistles night and noon. Her ups, her downs, her smiles, her frowns.'" I couldn't help but be reminded of this in the fall of 2001, when my mother was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. She had just finished doing an off-Broadway play called The Waverly Gallery, for which she received more awards for a single performance in a single season than any actress in theater history. The pinnacle of her career at age 81. And now she was on her way out. She said to her doctor, "I just want to make it through Christmas." "Oh, you'll live to see Easter." "Honey, I just want to make it through Christmas." Well, she did, with tremendous difficulty. And the day after Christmas, I went in to check on her. "How you feeling today, darling?" "I want you to do something for me." "Sure, name it." "I want you to call your brothers and tell them it's time to come and say goodbye." Well, I was so thrown by this. I was going on the advice of her doctors and thought she had several months left to live. I had a plane ticket in my pocket to go back to California that very afternoon. I took it out and showed it to her, almost as if seeing it would somehow make her change her mind. "Mama, do you want me to stay? Because if you want me to stay, you know I will." "No, honey. I want you to go." So I called my brothers. While we were waiting for them to arrive, she said, "Take me into the living room. I want to have one last look at the Christmas tree." We sat there, staring at the tree for a long time in silence. I remember she looked at it with the innocence of a small child. Finally, I said, "Well, Mama, I guess it's time to say goodbye." "Yeah, honey, I guess it is. You know, you've been a terrific mother." "Have I really?" "Yeah. And I just want you to know that even though I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to be okay." "Oh, I know you will, honey. So, Mama, you give Daddy and Nanny a big hug and a kiss for me, and I'll see you in the stars." Then I put my arms around her for the last time. It was a pleasure to have known her. She's not easy to forget. Rather like a habit one can never break. And yet, I've grown accustomed to her moods, accustomed to her smile. Accustomed.
Fred Zeniter of Forbes magazine, he says, Dear Miss Crawford, now that you've made this first stage appearance in New York, do you think this is likely? I would have given anything to see you in the Eileen Heckert role in Butterflies, and even thought of calling you. Please decide to try something. Believe me, it'll run for at least a year, even if it's a mistake. Well, we've talked about that. I think we know your answer.
No, wait a minute. I don't think anybody could have been better than Eileen Heckert in Butterflies Are Free. She's great. I talked to her the other night, day before yesterday, and I said, Eileen, I'm going to town hall on Sunday. She said, I know. And she said, you know, I gave a lecture recently at a university, the drama students, senior, and she said, I couldn't get through to them. And I thought, well, Eileen, you're bummed out. You're just bummed out. And all of a sudden, a kid stood up and said, what do you think about pot? And she said, honey, that's obviously your problem. Scotch is mine.
My mother loved that Joan Crawford said that about her, on a record no less, and captured it for posterity. And speaking of capturing things for posterity, from the very first time I did this show, about 4 years ago now, people said to me, Luke, this has got to be a book. Where's the book? Well, I am very proud of the fact that my book, Just Outside the Spotlight, was recently released a few months ago by Backstage Books with a foreword by Mary Tyler Moore. I've been talking about writing a book about my mother probably since I was about 14 years old. So in the past few months, to be able to hold this book in my hands is a thrill beyond belief. We have some copies available after the show. I'd be happy to sign one for anyone who'd like it in the lobby. Now, you have a list of divas in your program. If we can please bring up the house lights, raise your hand, shout out a name, and I'll give you the dish. Yes, ma'am. Greer Garson, thank you. My mother did a production of The Little Foxes for the Hallmark Hall of Fame with Greer Garson. And there was an assistant director named Bob on the show, somebody my mother had known for years. And on the first day of shooting, she couldn't wait to go out and have a real good gab fest over lunch with Bob. So when the lunch break was called, Greer Garson said, anyone going for lunch? Where are we going for lunch? And Mom and Bob sort of looked at each other and said, oh, Greer, we're just going to some little Irish pub. I'm sure it's not up to your standards. You really wouldn't care for this kind of place. And Greer Garson said, well, you know I'm half Irish. So Mom and Bob looked at each other and said, fine, would you care to join us? So they're sitting at this tacky little Irish pub, and Greer Garson is dressed to the nines with her amethyst brooch and all of this. And at one point during lunch, a woman comes up to the table with an autograph book. And she said, this is my lucky day. And Greer Garson flashes a Hollywood smile, and the woman said, Miss Heckert, I've seen the bat seat 5 times. Would you please sign my autograph book? And Bob starts to say, well, and you know who this is, don't you? And Greer Garson just touches his arm and said, let Miss Heckert have her day. Yes? Tallulah Bankhead, thank you. This is one of my favorite stories. There was a friend of the family's who was a restaurateur by the name of Ted Hook, who owned a famous theatrical restaurant called Backstage, where all the actors went. And before he became a restaurateur, he had been Tallulah's personal assistant. And oh, some of the stories he could tell. Well, there was this one story, my favorite, about when Tallulah was doing a guest spot on the old Kate Smith show. Now, can anyone here tell me what song opened the old Kate Smith show? Not God Bless America. That was her signature song, the song that opened her show. Exactly. When the moon comes over the mountain. Exactly. Yes, that was the song. So, Tallulah was on the set, and she was not a happy girl. And again, I won't use the word that she was using, but she was saying, effing costumes are terrible. Effing director doesn't know what the F he's doing. Effing script is a piece of crap. And Kate Smith was a very religious lady, and she went up to her and said, Miss Bankhead, this is a family show. And I treat my staff and my crew like they are my family. And I must ask while you are on my set that you do not use that kind of language. And Tallulah was sitting there tapping her foot and smoking the entire time. finally she wheeled around on her and said, "Listen here, you. I was a big star for 20 years before you ever dragged your fat ass over that mountain." And Kate Smith fainted. Went right down with a resounding thud. Who else? Yes. Debbie Reynolds, thank you. I have a prop for this one, too. I'm delighted that you asked about this one. My mother did one of those silly screwball comedies called My Six Loves, which starred Debbie Reynolds, and an all-star cast in this film. And towards the end of shooting, Debbie Reynolds was having a party for the entire cast and invited my mother to come early and help with place settings and that sort of thing. And so Mom goes to this elaborate mansion in Bel Air, and the butler escorts her into the dining room with the big, long marble table, which is laden with Lalique crystal and Steuben glassware and just all the stunning tableware. And in the middle of each place setting, there was one of these. Now this is a little glass cluster of grapes. And what you would do with this is you would put one at each person's place, and you would fill it with red wine or white wine or grape juice if they're in the program, and then each person could fill their own wine glass. So, and Mom would get these things up in Connecticut. They were made in Taiwan for about a nickel a piece at the time. So Mom's looking over this elaborate table, and she sees these, and she said, "Oh, Debbie, aren't those things heaven? I get them at the Pottery Barn in Connecticut for 69 cents a piece. How much do you have to pay for them out here in L.A.?" And Debbie Reynolds glares at her and said, "I am telling everyone. I've had them flown in from Switzerland. And Eckert, if you say a word, I'll strangle you." So that night at the party, nobody says a word about the Lalique, the Steuben, the fine flatware. All they talk about are the little glass clusters of grapes. And Gower Champion said, "Oh, Debbie, those are wonderful. Where'd you get those things?" "Oh, thank you. I had them flown in from Switzerland." "Right, Eckert?" Switzerland, trust me, oh no. One more.
Paul Newman.
Paul Newman, thank you very much. I love this story. Paul Newman, and this sort of segues into our final story that I want to share with you. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward met doing Picnic, which was my mother's first big break on Broadway. And the Newmans were tremendous friends of the families, came to the house many times. And Paul told this story about himself, about in the 60s when he was one of the biggest stars in the world. He was in some small New England college town, some sleepy little town, doing a film, and there was this woman who was the biggest Paul Newman fan on the planet. And all summer long, she was waiting and waiting for that fateful day when she would run into her favorite movie star. Well, it was a hot summer day. There's a long line at the ice cream parlor going out the door and around the block, and she realizes, as she's standing in line to get her ice cream cone, that standing directly behind her in line was Paul Newman. She thought, "Oh, dear God, just let me get my cone and not do anything stupid and get out of here in one piece." She kept taking her compact out of her purse and looking over her shoulder to see Paul Newman. Couldn't believe she was in the same airspace as her favorite star. So finally, she gets up to the counter, she orders her ice cream cone, she takes it, she gets outside, and she said, "Oh, thank God, I did it. I got out of there without doing it." Wait a minute. Where's my ice cream cone? "Oh, no, I'm going to have to go back in there in front of Paul Newman, and I'm going to feel so foolish." And Paul Newman comes out of the ice cream parlor, and he sees this woman looking around, looking terribly confused, and he comes up and he taps her on the shoulder, and he said, "Pardon me, ma'am, you put it in your handbag." And this poor lady was so nervous that she took her ice cream cone and came for it and went right for it. She opens her handbag, and there's strawberry ice cream dripping all over her wallet, her keys, her checkbook. And Paul just tipped his hat and walked away. As I mentioned, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward met doing Picnic, which was my mother's first big break on Broadway. This was just a really wonderful show, and it was a real slice-of-life kind of drama. Paul Newman was playing the small supporting role of the rich boy next door because the producers didn't think he was sexy enough to play the leading man. And as I said, it was a real slice-of-life kind of drama. The first thing anything like this had been seen on Broadway, about a small town in Kansas and the annual Labor Day picnic. Well, my mother had a wonderful role, but she really didn't think the play was going to be a success. And she shared a dressing room with another brilliant actress named Kim Stanley. And this was the play that put Kim Stanley on the map as well. And Kim didn't really get the play any more than my mother did. And as it went on to win one award after another, Kim Stanley would turn to my mother and say, the Tony Award for Best New Play, the Pulitzer Prize for Best Drama of... Heckert, what are they seeing out there that we're not seeing up here? Beats the hell out of me, Kim. So as the play won more and more awards, they would just kind of look at each other and scratch their heads. Till finally, one night when my mother came to the theater, Kim Stanley said, come here. All right, shut the door. All right, Heckert, I have a plan. I bought a ticket for Thursday night's performance. And I'm going to tell the stage manager that I have a toothache. And I'm going to sit in the 4th row in a pair of dark glasses and a raincoat and a big floppy hat. And I'm going to find out what the hell this turkey's all about. Now, after the show, you meet me at Downey's Bar and Grill on 8th Avenue, and I'll give you a full report. So, Thursday night, it was announced that the role normally played by Kim Stanley would be played by Miss Joanne Woodward in one of her first appearances on Broadway. And then, after the show, Mom could hardly wait to get out of hair and makeup and get over to Downey's. And as she walked into the bar, Kim Stanley is sitting there with 6 shots of whiskey lined up all along the bar. And Mom said, well, Kim, what did you think? Oh, honey, it is so much worse than we thought.